Hi, welcome to my channel Mostly Knitting. If you're a returning viewer, thank you so much for coming back. And if you're new here, I'm Tash, and this is a weekly podcast where I talk mostly about the knitting that I've been doing during the week, and I also put out regular tutorials. So it is Wednesday the 6th of November, and I'm recording from Sydney, Australia. So I'll get straight into my finished objects. I just have one this week and I am wearing it, and it's the Sellwood tee by Caitlin Hunter. So I knitted out of, this is my leftover yarn, Orange Flower MCS Sport. So that stands for Merino Cashmere Silk. So it has some lovely drape. I did go down a needle size. The pattern recommends a 4mm needle size, but I know I like this kind of yarn on a 3.75mm. I knit the 35¼ inch size, but mine turned out much smaller, so my gauge was much tighter. So mine is actually 29 inches. So for my 32-inch bust, that's 3 inches of negative ease. But I'm actually really happy with that. I really like the fit. Other things that were different for me, I actually knit it pretty much to pattern in terms of the length. So I did knit it 11 inches long, but then it blocked out to about 12 inches. So it definitely grew, but perhaps not as much as if I'd used like a yarn that had a higher cotton blend. So it's got a fair bit of merino in this, but it's still, I feel like it's still got, you know, it really still shows off the lace work. You know, it's open enough for that. I am wearing a camisole, so I've got a bra and a nude camisole underneath it because there's a fair bit of open work. Perhaps if it was more drapey, I could get away with just a bra, but because of the negative ease, I feel a bit better with a camisole on. And because of the amount of holes all over it, it is all over lace. So I mentioned last week that I hadn't finished it last week, and I had this section here that I had done where there was quite a lot of stockinette. So you really moved out of all over lace and to a section where you couldn't perhaps do a full knit 4 together and then all of the yarn overs. You just didn't have any lace at all. And there was sort of a couple of large stockinette sections here. You can see I have actually re-knit that. I'll put a picture up there of what it looked like with the two versions. A few people suggested rather than ripping this one out, just do the other one in lace and see if I like it. And then if it's worth it, rip this one back. So I did that. I thought that was a great suggestion. It also helped me realize, I mean, either way, I was going to have to rip something back. If I did it in lace and I didn't like it, I was going to have to rip that one back because it wasn't going to match. But if I liked the lace, I was going to have to come and change this one. I couldn't have one with lace and one with stockinette. So it was actually quite an easy adjustment. So with the pattern, if you couldn't quite, you know, as you're decreasing stitches here to shape the neck, if you can't quite fit in a knit 4 together, you can just do a knit 3 together, or a knit, I think I didn't even have to do a knit 2 together. I just did a knit 3 together and had 2 balancing yarn overs. Instead of a knit 4 together and 3 balancing yarn overs. So it really wasn't a big deal. I'm not quite sure why that wasn't incorporated into the pattern. So there are 2 charts for the pattern. There's charts for size 1, 3, and 5, and that one has a lot of sizes 1, 3, and 5 has this large stockinette section, but sizes 2, 4, and 6, just due to the different stitch count, doesn't have that same amount of stockinette section. So it's really only a few sizes that it affects, and all I did was just, you know, I just looked at how many stitches I had to work with and then just stuck a knit 3 together and a couple of yarn overs, and that way it still incorporated the you know, I didn't have these big stockinette sections, which I'm really, really happy with. The other thing that I did find was a bit different was it talks about binding off at either end, and like binding off every row. And obviously I can understand where that happens. On one row it's the start of the row, and then the other row it's the end of the row, but you don't usually bind off a stitch at the end of the row. Like a normal bind off where you knit 2, take 1 over, you would then end up with a stitch hanging off the end, not connected to the rest of the work. So and that really wasn't explained in the pattern, and I think that might confuse some people. So all I did was I did a standard decrease where I had where you're going to pick up stitches for a neckline afterwards. I had 1 stockinette stitch on the edge kept for the purpose of pickup, and then on one side I did slip knits and slip pearls, depending on which side of the you know, whether I was on the right or wrong side. and I can't remember which is which, and then one side was knit 2 together and purl 2 together, so that they were always leaning. And I had them leaning. Sometimes you can sort of, I think it's called fully fashioned, where you have them directed into the line. I just chose to have them directed going up the line like that. And I picked up the stitches. I think here for the neckline I did 7 rows, and then I did 2 setup rows and then the tubular bind off. The pattern does talk about doing a tubular bind off. And then I think for the sleeves I just did 5 rows. I just wanted them, because there's not really any kind of shaping, you just sort of, these are basically just at least for the edges, you do not do any kind of shaping on the end. So this is just going straight up. So I picked up, I think I may have picked up 2 less stitches, but I picked up 90 stitches. I think I was meant to pick up 92. I was like, that's close enough. She did specify a pickup ratio, so I followed that. I ended up with 90, and I was happy with that. So I did 5 rows there, not quite as deep, and then 2 setup rows and the tubular bind off. And on the bottom doesn't have ribbing. It has this really nice, you sort of pretty much go straight into the lace, so that you've just got this scalloped edge. Yeah, so I really like it. I'll just show you the back. But the back is pretty much the same as the front, except that it doesn't have the dip down neckline. Yeah, is there anything else I was going to say? Yeah, no, I think I'm really happy with it. I guess it did take a couple of months, but it didn't feel like it was a difficult project. And it was definitely worth it having, and I'll mention this again later with my clay pullover, it was worth it having a stitch marker because there were slip stitches every other round. When I was working in the round, it was worth having a stitch marker that really directed me very quickly, am I on a slip round or am I on a knit round? Wasn't so bad when I was working back and forth, because whenever I was on the right side it was a slip, whenever I was on the wrong side it was a knit or a purl or whatever, but it wasn't a slip. So, but when you're working in the round, it just takes the guesswork. Like, yes, I can read my knitting, but that just takes a little bit more time, a little bit more concentration, and particularly if I'm in the middle of watching a show or something, I don't really want to ask my husband, can you just pause it, because I just want to like check something with my knitting. I mean, he would, but this just means I don't even have to stop and think. I know exactly what I'm doing based on what my little stitch marker says. So this one's from Twice Shed Sheep. But actually, I may as well mention it now. I was watching Sherry from Good Knits, and she was talking about this kind of thing, but in relation to, I don't know if it was raglan, but increases, where one round you don't increase, one round you do. And she had a little workaround where she had 2, just a normal stitch marker, and then she took a couple of these like, these coloured locking stitch markers, and I think she used green and red. You can go watch her podcast and she describes it in there, but I thought I'll just mention it here because I thought it was a really good workaround. If you don't happen to have one of these, you don't need to go out and buy anything specific for it. She had like 1 green and 1 yellow, and so you just put that on the needle so that you can quickly work out, am I on a, I think hers was red, am I on a row where I'm going to green for increase, green for go. You have to have something that's going to make sense to you. So for me, with these ones here, even though that says K and I, so that would work like 1 row is knit, 1 row is increase. For me, K meant knit and the other one just meant not knit, like slip. So it doesn't, the letter doesn't have to match, but you have to have something that you have memorized for yourself, what color or what thing means what. So anyway, I just thought I'd mention that. And she has a great podcast too if you're not already watching. Right, so that is, I think that is it for my finished objects. So I'm going to move on to Friend from the Vault, which if you're new here, that's just some knitting where I show you something that I made earlier. And this, usually when I have a garment for a finished object, I'll show you something that's not a garment. So this is just a tiny little thing, but it might actually be relevant for people because it's potentially you might be making holiday knits. So this is a tiny little pair of fingerless mitts. They're called Easy Fingerless Mitts by Roxanne Richardson, and it's a free pattern on Ravelry. I don't know if it's off Ravelry as well, but that's how I access it, from Ravelry. I download it there. And Roxanne has a fantastic YouTube channel. She has lots of tutorials, and she's just a really knowledgeable person and a really lovely personality as well. So these mitts, I actually only have one finished one and one that has been, because you actually knit them flat and sew them up. The reason that I have these and this one is not completed is this is what I used to use when I was teaching learn to knit classes at my local yarn store, Skein Sisters. So I had some that were completed, and then I have one that was where one was complete and one was knit flat, so you could see what you were actually knitting and then what it looked like knit up. So this I knit using Madelinetosh DK, and I think, I'm not 100% sure because I didn't actually write down what the yarn, like I didn't put it in stash anyway. I'm pretty sure it's Gemini Twins, but don't quote me on that. Anyway, really lovely. I mean, Tosh DK is a really lovely yarn. So the way the pattern's written is it's actually a really good teaching pattern. So it's one, if somebody is learning how to knit, it means you don't need, a lot of people don't have circular needles. They usually only, like particularly if they've got inherited needles, they're usually straight needles. So you can knit this flat. So what you do is you cast on, so when I say it's a free pattern, so I'm not giving anything away, and I actually asked Roxanne's permission to use the pattern in my class, and she gave me permission to do that. So I think even if something is a free pattern, it's just kind of, I don't know, it felt like courtesy to ask Roxanne specifically if I could use it for a class. So you cast on along this side here, and then you do a few rows of garter, and then you do some garter on the ends. One is for the wrist and one is for the top, and then you do a bunch of stockinette in the middle, and then a bit more garter, and then you sew it up. So the idea is that your cast on actually is the, I'll just pop this one on. Your cast on is the length of the mitt. So you cast on along here, and then you knit around, and then that way you can kind of judge based on how much you have to knit. The only thing that you know right at the beginning is whatever your cast on will determine how large it is. And of course you don't even fully have to like work out how much is going to be for the cuff and the tip until you've done a couple of rows. But I think it's a really good teaching pattern because people just start with knitting first, because sometimes if you're mixing up the knit stitch, and I don't think it's a good thing for people to learn the knit stitch and the purl stitch like in the same sitting. So you could cast on, maybe even cast on for someone if they've never done it before. Cast on, knit a couple of rows where it's just knitting, and then you incorporate switching to doing some purling and getting used to using stitch markers, then a little bit of seaming, and you get to sort of, learn how to do, mattress stitch. That's what I used to do for the class, teach people how to do mattress stitch. And also just understanding reading. It felt to me like an accessible way for people to learn how to knit, and people of different skill levels could still have the same kind of entry point for this. Anyone, even if you'd never held yarn or needles, you might be able to at least get most of this knit up. So I have actually made other versions of this. I made a pair for my mum out of Leading Men Fibre Arts Dramaturg, which is a DK weight yarn in the colourway Copper Cloud. I can't show them to you physically because I've given them to my mum, but there's a picture of them. But you can print, that's a DK weight. This is a DK, I think it's written for a worsted, but you can use whatever yarn you have. You can just cast on more stitches. So if there's someone in your life that you want to, that wants to learn how to knit, I do recommend this pattern because it's free and it's pretty easy. But also you might just like to make a few for gifts. So, and obviously with Christmas coming up, if you plan to make Christmas gifts, I do recommend it. And yeah, you can use any kind of leftover yarn in stash. I think the Dramaturg ones that I made for my mum, I used 46 grams. So you really only need about half a skein of yarn to make a pair. So that's it. I think that's the only thing I wanted to mention for my friend from the vault. But yes, very nice pattern. So I'm up to my works in progress. So because one of the reasons that I pulled this yarn out was actually, now that I look at it, I thought this was the same yarn, but I don't think it is. So this is, it's the same base, but a different colour. So maybe this is Holly Festival. I'm not 100% sure. Maybe that's Holly Festival, and maybe this one's Gemini Twins. Anyway, I could be making up those colourway names, so don't quote me on any of that, but it's definitely Madelinetosh DK. So this is I have two new works in progress. This is another version of my baker's hat. The first one that I knit it out of a worsted yarn, and it's actually knit for a worsted yarn. Same size needles, obviously, because you fold that up. I didn't really worry too much about that weaving in that end fully. So that's what it looks like, my baker's hat. So this is one that I made out of Amarisu yarn, and this one looks good for fitting an adult, but when I cast this one on exactly to the pattern, same size needles, but because it's a DK weight and this one's a worsted, it is coming out a little bit smaller. Now, I'm not making this for anyone in particular. I should say, sorry, my baker's hat by EM Knits. I started this on actually just the day I recorded last week, so it's been on the needles for 7 days, and this is just my walking knitting. So I don't know if you can see, it's just a little bit smaller than the pink one. Not heaps, but a little bit. So it may end up having to be for a child, but the colours kind of, you know, they're quite happy and would probably appeal to a child maybe. So, and yes, I thought this was the same colour, but I don't think these are actually. Well, maybe they are, who knows? Doesn't really matter, does it? They're not necessarily a set. Although if they were going to be, I would have to sew. They're close enough to be a set, I guess. I'd have to sew that one up. I don't have any like sort of, you know, 8-9-year-old children. That's what I think this would sort of fit an 8 or, because it's a little bit tight on my hands. It would fit maybe sort of like a preteen child, because it fits my hand, but it's just probably a little bit small. And so yeah, something like that. I don't actually really have any children that I'm close to around that age, but I could, I could just generally give it, you know, just hang on to it for a future gift or donate it when I notice, or give it to someone when there is someone in my life around that age. So, you know, all of these things, like if I don't have anyone, this is my walking knitting. If I don't have anyone specific to give it to straight away, it doesn't matter. I could just, you know, donate it to, or give it to someone eventually when I do know someone at that age. So because you fold it up, so it's just a 1x1 rib to start with. Actually, I'll show you this one. It's a 1x1 rib to start with, and then some stockinette, and then crown decreases in a group of 4, which is pretty standard. With this one, I don't have a huge amount of yarn. I'm pretty sure I have enough, but I'll just be weighing a bit at the end, and particularly if I'm making it for a child, it will be fine. And also because you can fold up the brim as much or as little as you want. The pattern itself, you're meant to do like a purl turning round about sort of here or so, but then that really defines where you're supposed to turn it, and I don't really even particularly like that look. So I'm quite happy to not have a turning round, and then whatever length it ends up being, people can just fold it to whatever like length they like to wear it. So, but I think it's really pretty, and I'm knitting it normally like 1x1 round, but I've talked before about how the inside looks a bit nicer than the outside, but because you're going to fold that up anyway, that's what you're going to see. So, don't know if that's focusing. So, yep. Anyway, the colours are really making me happy, and that's been really nice walking knitting. I meant to knit until 5 inches. I think I'm at about 4, so I've just got a little bit more to go. But it's a great pattern, easy, and it's free as well on Ravelry. My second new work in progress is actually one I mentioned last week, and it's the Throwover by Andrea Mowry. It's actually going to have to get frogged, so I thought I'll show it to you before I frog it. And I also think it's quite good if you decide you're going to frog something, or you're not happy with how it's coming along. It's good to just put it aside and have a think about it anyway, and then strategize any possible solutions. So I will show you what I got done. So I cast this on, and this is actually quite quick knitting because this is the main yarn. Sorry, I just dropped the ball. The main yarn is the Rerum Natura Gilead, and I think the colorway, I can't remember the colorway, doesn't matter. I'll put it down below. And then I had some of my friend Beck's handspun, and I'll get into why I wound a bit off. I only had 1 skein of that, and because I didn't have enough of it for the pattern, I only had 92 meters, I bought some Dream State from my local yarn store, and I thought I'll just sort of, unfortunately, this is part of the issue. I didn't really read the pattern properly before I bought it, and it has this really lovely color work on it, and like a nice chevron effect, but I didn't read that you actually need 3 contrast colors. And obviously with Beck's Handspun I only had the 1, and then I thought, oh well, this will be a second, the Dream State will be a second one, and maybe I can do 1 2 1, because you sort of alternate 1 2 3. So I thought, well, I could do 1 2 3. But the weight of these 2 yarns is really quite different. The Dream State is much lighter. So what I started off doing, actually, you know what, I'll pop it on because I'll end up with clanking otherwise. I started off with just the Dream State for the 1x1, but so it's knit with a 4, and I used the recommended needle size, and I started with a 34-inch size, which is the smallest size. And it's obviously, anyway, it doesn't matter how it's sitting. There are meant to be short rows in it, but later on. So everything is just like straight down. There's no, like the back or front doesn't look any different at the moment. So I'll just move that around. So you've got some 2x2 ribbing. Then you've got this 1x1 color, some increases, 1x1 color work. And so what I used there was 2, and that's meant to be 6 rows. So 2 from one skein, 2 from another, 2 from another. So I used the outside for the top 2 rows, the inside for the next 2 rows, and then I used the outside again, but of course it hadn't gone far enough in the changing color cycle. I should have like switched to like just pulled out some more yarn. This is so expensive though. The thought of just pulling out random sections and cutting it off it's just a bit hard for me. So anyway, it just isn't what it's meant to be. It's meant to be sort of 3 colors there. So that's the first problem. Another problem is I feel like this is too open. So in the pattern you switch from a 4mm to a 5mm needle, and Dream State is one of the yarns recommended to use as the contrast, or it is the recommended contrast color. I am using a different main color, but even still, like I just feel like that's way too open. This yarn I think would be better on a 4.5mm needle. And actually I knit the Rerum Natura, this yarn, on a 4.5mm needle for my, what's the one? With the snowflake on it. Oh, it'll come to me in a minute. Anyway, so I used this yarn for that sweater, and I was really happy with it, and really happy with it at that gauge, or on a 4.5mm needle, and that was a 19 stitch gauge. This pattern has a 16.25 stitch gauge, obviously with a larger needle size of 5mm, but I just think that's probably a little bit too open for this and for this. So that's the first problem. Don't really like these on a 5mm. Oh, this could get away with a 5mm, but I don't think this one. Then I started using Beck's Handspun, and I tried, like what I was saying was like, this is color 1, this is color 2, but then, and then I was going to go back to this as color 3, but unfortunately this was just way too thin, and the difference was like, it was and there were some rows with all 3 colours in them, and this was just really, really too thin for that, and it was sort of getting lost in the colour work. So then I thought, oh well, I'll just do all of the chevron-y section with Beck's Handspun, but I didn't pull out and create 3 little balls. I just kept knitting from the 1 ball, and so it ended up sort of striping, which means you're not getting the chevron effect. And so then I was like, okay, and I think the weight is a little bit, this is definitely heavier than this. So I realized there was just too many problems. I stopped knitting and just put it aside, and then thought, right, I'm going to have a think about it. So I pulled out, so Beck's Handspun was about, this is my friend Beck, she spun this and gifted it to me. This whole skein is about 90 grams. So I pulled out 30 grams of it and thought, okay, if I have 3 different balls of this, then at least I could do, because this colour is quite different from this colour, so at least then if I'm properly doing the colour work here, then I'll get that effect. But then this was still a problem, and I don't have enough of this to use this in all the sections. And I just realised this is not working. I think, and even this is a bit too heavy for this. So I've had a rethink, and I've decided I'm going to rip back all the way up to here. I'm going to use Beck's Handspun for some fingerless mitts. I probably won't do the Roxanne Richardson pattern. I'll probably just do some standard, because I can actually use this. This is on a 5mm needle. I can get a bit of an idea of gauge on a 5mm. I actually don't mind that on a 5mm for a sweater, but maybe for mitts I might go down to a 4.5. that might just help me get a bit of an idea of how many stitches to cast on. And there will be enough for me to make myself some fingerless mitts out of Beck's lovely handspun. And in fact, for me, I'm more likely to wear these every day in the winter. When I have my early morning classes at 7 a.m, I'm often, like in winter, I'm really like, my hands are freezing. So I probably wear these really regularly as opposed to a sweater that might just get worn here or there. And particularly if I'm not 100% happy with how it's going. So what I'm going to do, even though and this wasn't actually a lot of knitting, this was just maybe, I think I did the ribbing and then maybe from here to here was only 2 hours. It was not a lot of knitting. So I'm going to rip all the way back to here. I don't think, I'm quite happy with that ribbing on a 4mm needle and where it's actually sitting. So even if I go down to a 4.5mm for the body, I'm not going to go back and turn this into a 3.75. Like often you have a 2 size difference between ribbing and body. But I think this is fine. And I used a 4mm needle for the ribbing for my, the snowflake, Snow Wonder, that's what it was called, Snow Wonder. I used that for Snow Wonder as well. I think that will work just fine for this. So I'll just rip back to here, change to a 4.5mm needle, and then I'll switch to just using this. Now there's not a lot of contrast here, which is fine if I do that all over, but I think it was going to look a bit yuck to have low contrast, high contrast, low contrast for the next 1x1 section. So I don't think I have enough of this in one skein. This is getting a bit expensive, but I could get one more skein of this from Skein Sisters, and then whatever else I actually, if I need to, if I don't wind it up, but I might want to wind it up just to make it a third color. I think I'll have to, because this problem of 1, 2, 1, I'll just use the leftovers for some fingerless mitts or something. I will. It's not going to sit idle, that's for sure. It's too expensive to do nothing. But that way I could go inside of one end, outside of the other end, and then other skein. So I think they have 3 more balls of this particular color at Skein Sisters. I could get a different colorway, but none of them really seem to match with this very well. But you know how sometimes when you're trying to pick a yarn like Spincycle, you really want to go super close so that they look as close as each other. But every now and then you get one of these that's just totally random and you think, is that even the same colorway? And it sort of is the same but sort of different. So that's what I'm going to look for, is one that's substantially different to this one, to use that perhaps as my third color. So it's sort of the same, sort of not. Anyway, that's a lot of talking about something that's just going to get ripped back. But yes, that's just knitting, right? That's at least whatever I've done with it is not unusable. It's not like sewing and I've cut the fabric and now it's too small, or it doesn't fit anybody, or I cut it the wrong way or whatever. It's not going to work, but I'll be able to make it work into some things that I will be much happier with. So good pattern, well-written pattern. I just didn't really pay attention. Oh, the other thing I'll say is, even though I cast on for the 34-inch size, and I'm going to be knitting this on it, I'll end up with a much tighter gauge, so I would end up with a much smaller than 34-inch bust size, and I don't want negative ease for this sweater, I want positive ease. But the 34-inch and the 38-inch have the same cast on size, the same, and even the same first increase, although I have to rip that back anyway because I need to switch needles, but at least the ribbing, it's the same number, it's the same cast on for both the 34 and the 38, so I can keep the ribbing. It's not that big a deal. If it was different, I would rip it out. But it is this, it's not, that's probably an hour's worth of work. But at least I can keep the ribbing because it's the same size. There's just a few more increases for the 38-inch size. And yes, I'll definitely go up in size, because then I'll have to work out what my new, I still want it to have a little bit of, not a huge amount of positive ease, but for the style of the sweater, I definitely want some positive ease. Right, so it is a new cast on. It's going to get sort of a lot of backwards growth before I then move. And I am going to be at my local yarn store this Saturday. So yes, watch this space. Watch for next week. They'll hopefully, well, we'll see. I never know what I'm going to work on, but hopefully I will, be inspired to rip it back and get started again. And it's obviously very quick knitting at this gauge. My next work in progress is the clay sweater, and I'm using BC Yarn Loch Lomond. And I'm knitting the extra small, which is the 39-inch size. I started this 23 days ago. Since last week, I have done the collar. So I'm going to try it on quickly because it is pretty hot here. So So I'm using the recommended needles. Oh, no, I'm not. The recommended needles is a 5mm needle. I went down to a 4mm needle. But I must be pretty close to gauge because I'm knitting the 39-inch size, and when I measure it, it's 38 inches around. So pretty close to gauge on the 4.5mm needle. So I picked up the stitches for the neckline and knit the exact recommended number of, and I did use 2 needle sizes down. So I used a 3.75mm needle, and I ended up picking up a few, I followed the ratio, but ended up with a few more stitches. I think I actually ended up with like 8 more stitches, which was probably a little bit too much. So I just decreased it a couple of points. Like I think I just, in my first round, decreased on the first ribbing round, maybe sort of back here and maybe here at these corners. And then, so this hasn't been blocked at all. I think it will bloom up quite nicely when it's blocked. And I really like that sort of, where it's not too tight around my neck, but it's going to come up high enough, especially around the back, to keep me warm. I'll show you the back actually. Yeah, so that's, so that's 3 inches of ribbing. And yeah, I like it. The only funny thing is, obviously, and so I'm just working my way down the body. I talked about what I was doing with this garter in the round, and I have last episode. Because garter in the round, because you're purling, that can be a little bit looser, but I'm finding just pulling it, just being conscious with my tension and tightening up a little bit, that has been enough to keep these looking the same as the ones that were done. So this is in the round, this is flat. These ones were knit because it's flat. These ones are purling because it's in the round, but I think they're looking pretty much the same. As long as I'm not wrapping differently. I tried that with like 1 row, and I thought, look, that's fine, but I don't think I need to. So I just tightened up my tension a bit. It looks kind of funny because it's a drop shoulder, so this is sticking out. I feel a bit like a frilly necked lizard when I look at it like this, sort of like this flaps flaring out, but I'm sure it will look fine once I pick up the stitches and knit down. Look how huge that armhole is, but it's meant to be really oversized. So what I'm going to do is I'll probably get to either finishing this ball or close to finishing this ball. I'll do the required number of repeats of this patterning, and then I'll leave this and then pick up stitches for the sleeves and do both sleeves, and then I'll finish off the body, because that may sort of, pull it up a little bit, and I might end up making it too short if I do the sleeves later, and then it sort of just pulls it up a bit. So yeah, I'm happy with how it's going. I think it's very, very lightweight. The yardage on this yarn is really, really good. So I think I've got maybe 7 skeins. I've got plenty though, because I had, it doesn't matter how many I had. I think I didn't have enough, and I got an extra one just to make sure. I will tell you in the end how much I actually use. I've got to get this off. It's so hot. Yeah, things are warming up here in Sydney. What is it now? It's November. Was there anything else I was going to say? No, I think that's it. Oh, and I'm doing the same thing because on the sides, it's got this slip stitch. Because if you don't do some kind of treatment, you'll end up with garter in the round, you'll end up with quite a jog when you sort of end one round and start the next. So I've got this, it's got this 2 stitches where you just slip them every other round. So for this pattern as well, I have the, the twice sheared sheep stitch marker, but you could use the same kind of, just a couple of different coloured locking stitch markers to make sure that am I slipping when I'm supposed to be slipping and knitting when I'm supposed to be knitting, that kind of thing. So yep, so that's coming along well. It definitely won't be finished by next week because there's still, it is very oversized. I've still got 2 sleeves and the rest of the body to go, but I do feel good having done the neckline, and that's because it's a very different kind of neckline from any of my other sweaters. So and it's sort of, I think it will kind of be like my storm sweater in terms of just a throw on oversize, but much lighter weight, so easier, just sort of lighter to wear. So yeah, very happy with that. My next work in progress, I've got one more top, and that is the Audrey top by Petite Knit. This has been on the needles for 40 days and will probably be on the needles for a lot longer. There's lots and lots of strands hanging off it. Just because I have to work on it, because it's 100% linen. This is Shibui Knits linen in the colorway Poppy. I have to, just give my hands, only just do a few rows at a time. So this is upside down, but I'll just show you where I'm at. There's really not a lot to look at because it's so sort of messy and yarn hanging off it, but I'll just talk about it. So obviously it's meant to sit like that. I picked up the stitches because I'd done a provisional cast on, did the back, the front, and then I unpicked the provisional cast on, and I was going to, because my gauge compared to my black version, my gauge is larger, both stitch gauge and row gauge, but I was finding so what I ended up doing was just moving this up higher, and I was going to do a few more rows and then join in the round, but I realized that with my black one, the armhole was quite deep, was a bit too deep. It's sort of as it dropped. So I thought, well, why not take advantage of the fact that this row gauge is smaller, and if I just join in the round now, then it'll, I won't have as large a gaping armholes. So I won't try this on now because it's too awkward, but I have actually sort of tried this on, and because it's meant to have straps going over it, so it is very awkward to try on, but I have tried it on and sort of held it sort of a bit together and up, and I can see that it's going to sit just fine. And I'll just base the straps based on, after I finish the body, how I would like it to sit. So now I'm at a very easy point of just working around and around. So all that's got left to do is to work down the body and then do the I-cord straps. So I think that's actually going to be really quite, I mean, I love the color. I just have to, it's going to be a bit slow going, just because it's difficult for my hands. So I'll do no more than half an hour in a sitting on this. It's easy knitting because I'm just knitting in the round. That's all I have to do now, knit in the round and I-cord straps. But yeah, I don't reckon that will be finished next week either. That has been, yes, as I already said, been on the needles for 40 days. My last 2 works in progress. One is, Pure Joy by Joji Locatelli. I've been working down into the second, this is Skein Classy, this is Mist and In the Navy, and this skein is quite a bit darker than the other one, but because it's a shawl, I don't think it's I'm fine with it. You'll notice it, I think, because camera, it's sort of even more obvious on camera, but I'll show you and you'll be able to see where it's switched. So it's as a pattern, as long as you don't leave it for too long, or you make notes if you do leave it, it's pretty easy to memorize as long as you're sort of doing a bit regularly. But if you do put it down, make sure you make a note of which row you're on and which side you're on, because lots and lots of short rows and 2 balls hanging off it, and which way am I going, so I'm on the last wedge now, and you can probably see where I changed to the second skein. So a number of people have said that they've needed to change into a second skein for this pattern. So what I would recommend, if you have to do that, is to perhaps start your second skein at the beginning of the last wedge, so that this, even though you would have a change, the change would be sort of interrupted by this contrast color. Because of the way you're going to wear this shawl, like that kind of thing, right? No one's going to see that one wedge has a different color in the middle of it. So if you lay it flat like that, yeah, you're going to see it. But for the way that I imagine most people would wear it, sort of wrapped around like that, you're not going to see it. So I'm definitely not ripping that back. It doesn't bother me. If that was a sweater, that would be a problem. For me, 100% that would be a problem. I would have to have been alternating skeins, and I would not live with that in a garment with one. For me, right? Everyone's different, but for me, I wouldn't be happy with that. And for some people, they wouldn't be happy with this in a shawl. But for me, I'm okay with that. So yeah, I've still got this last wedge on this to go, and then there's quite a substantial amount for the border of this color. So that's not going to be finished anytime soon, and I'm not prioritizing it. I just, when everything else is in a place that can't be knit on, or my hands need a break from the linen, then this gets some attention. But other than that, I usually want to be working on a garment. And then my last work in progress. I'm almost finished this pair of skimmer socks, and then I think I'm ready to take a bit of a break from the skimmer socks and just work on more hats on my walks. So I'd already finished this is String Theory Colorworks in the colorway Resistor. I've got one done, and then the second one, it is very easy walking knitting though, I have to say. The second one is almost done. I've actually just finished the heel flap, and I'm just about to start the ribbing. So yeah, that'll be finished by next week for sure. And then it will just be all the hats all the time. And yeah, that's quite good portable knitting, I think. At least, and it's also much easier on my hands, whereas socks, yeah, because I walk for an hour straight of working on socks is a little bit much for my hands anyway, whereas a hat I could knit for days and it wouldn't bother me. So yeah, that's it. That's quite a lot. That's it for my works in progress. Now, this isn't a regular segment, but I just wanted to do an update on the pattern that I mentioned in my Friend from the Vault last week, which is Nordiska. So I mentioned last week that the sleeves were quite tight, and that was because of the length, and I couldn't pull them up. It was just kind of uncomfortable where they were sitting. Now, that's largely my own fault. This pattern is meant to be, it's written by Caitlin Hunter, and it's meant to have a 20 stitch gauge, and I used yarn that has a 26 stitch gauge. So like I was going to get a vastly different outcome. So this is much smaller, and which I'm fine with actually. I quite like it as a top, much more fitted. So the bust circumference being much smaller is not a problem. But obviously if I follow the pattern for my size, you know, and it being with that much tighter a gauge, it pulled in for the bust just fine, but when the amount that it pulled in for the sleeves is uncomfortable for me. So what I did, and you can see one of them is not like the other. I had some great suggestions. Some people suggested actually cutting off, like making them long sleeves, because if this whole thing moved down, it wouldn't be so uncomfortable anymore. It would be sitting at my wrist, and that this has actually 40 stitches here. That would be fine if it was here, but not here where my arm circumference is much larger. Unfortunately, because I did have plenty left over from this, unfortunately I already used it for Misurina, and you can see I used a lot of it for Misurina. So, and I love this, so I'm not going to unravel this to rescue this. So that wasn't an option, but it was a great suggestion, and if I had leftover yarn I would have done it. So my other options were to cut this off completely and turn it into short sleeved, or accept the length but just rip it back a little bit and take out some of these final decreases. So what I did was I actually worked out just where were the decreases and how much were they and where is it uncomfortable. So I realized that this is 40. So I didn't even look at the pattern. I was just able to read my knitting. And what I do in this is, especially if there's color work or ribbing, all I do is I put a stitch marker. So this is a 2x2 rib. So I put a stitch, just if I want to count it really quickly, I put a stitch marker on, let's say on one of the knit sections, and then I just count around 2, 4, 6, 8, blah, 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 until I get back to this, and then that's just really quick, so I'm not having to count stitch by stitch. And similarly, this section here, like for example, this white and that's actually sort of white and grey, that's a 2 and that's a 3, so that's a 5 stitch. Like every white section, there's 5, so I just put one thing in the first one, and then I go around 5 and then count them, like 5, 10, count the whites, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, da, 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 da. So it's rather than counting each stitch. So if that's helpful to anyone, if they're ever either ripping back or they're trying to work out how many stitches they've got on a particular, you know, where they're at in a pattern. So I worked out, so that was a little tip there. I had 40 stitches here. There's a decrease here, and so that's where it went from. This section here is 52 stitches, and then there's a decrease down to 40. So the rest of that is 40, and that's definitely too tight. So this is at 52 stitches, and this here is 65 stitches. So somewhere in here I decreased down to 52. So I ripped back all of the 40, and I'm just ripping back now to get the 40 back down to the 52, and that feels quite okay. So I think as long as, the main thing for me is that I can push it up to my elbow and feel okay with it. So I think that's what I'm going to do. Like I was just debating 65 or 52, which one would be all right, like which one do I think would be a good finishing number. And I think the 52 is going to be okay. 12 stitches is pretty substantial, even on 26 stitch gauge. That's about 2 inches difference, right? So, and I'll probably only go down maybe 1 needle size. So if this is a 3.5, I might just do the ribbing on a 3.25, and then I'll try it and see how comfortable it is. So I've ripped back, and this is all I have of this. I could not even find any tiny ball of this color, and I've got sort of these, I keep everything. So I've got all of these little mini balls. And then I have a larger tub of this sort of single ply fingering weight yarn of larger leftovers, and then these are all my small ones. It was not in here, it's not in that tub. So I must have had almost a minuscule amount, or I would have been able to find it. So I'm going to have to reuse this for my ribbing. I might actually even just, I know it seems a bit pathetic, but I might actually soak that just to, make it a little bit nicer to knit with. The other yarn is Composition Book Grey and Madelinetosh Composition Book Grey and Antler. So I've got plenty, because obviously if I'm keeping a larger stitch count, I'm going to need to have a little bit, like a tiny bit more yarn. So look how funny that is. So that's been unknit. So that's like Fair Isle unknitting is quite funny. So I'm going to, there's just a few more, you can see from this one here, what I have to like undo this last decrease, do this little brown and pink section on, grey and pink section on a slightly larger stitch count, so 52, and then do the ribbing on a 52. Now obviously that means I'm going to lose some of the rows, but I actually noticed that I think there's like 7 rows here, and I think this is only like 3 or 4 rows here. And I think in the pattern it's actually much wider, but I chose to do it quite small. And then I think I've only got maybe 5 or 6 rows here. So if I have to lose a few rows in the ribbing, that's fine anyway. I mean, I've got to make it work, right? So yes, so hopefully I'll be able to show this next week as, see, that one just feels so much more, whereas I can't even like pull that up. That's so uncomfortable. Now obviously there's no bind off here, so I might have to do a sewn bind off or quite a stretchy bind off to be able to pull it up, but I think 52 stitches should work okay for that. And if it doesn't, that'll be annoying. I'll have to rip back again, but I'll try with this one before I even touch this one. I'll try this one on 52. If it doesn't work, I'll go to 65, and then I'll do the same with this one. One thing I thought I'd just show you while I grabbed this skein of Antler, I think I remember last week I mentioned how Antler had kind of changed in its colorway. So this is what Antler used to look like. Sorry, got my hair on it. And then this is the newer Antler. I don't know how new, like this is still a few years old, but you see how different they are. See the grey cast there and the cream cast there? Really, really different, and they are both Antler. So yeah, I just find that really interesting. Sometimes like maybe the whatever dye they were using, like I just don't remember them ever saying like, well, why don't you just call it a different, like Antler's now discontinued, this is like a different name or something. But anyway, they are both Antler. So you just got to be careful sometimes when you're buying another skein. Like these two are not the same color. Well, technically they are, but they're not. Now this other section is also not a regular section, but I just wanted to do a bit of an update. Last week I was talking about petite knit patterns and using a petite knit junior pattern instead of a petite knit adult pattern if you happen to be on the sort of, like if you find that even the smallest size of a petite knit pattern is just too large. Or just has too much positive ease for you. And a viewer put in the comments, and I'm so grateful, she mentioned that like for some patterns where there's a junior version, they aren't exactly the same in terms of the features, and she referenced the Storm Sweater. So I'm just going to put a picture of the back of the Storm Sweater adult here, and you see how it's got that lovely trapezoid? Whereas the Storm Sweater Junior doesn't have that feature. So I think that's one thing to just be careful of. I did knit the Storm Sweater Adult, and I'm really glad I did because I really like that feature. And potentially one way that you could get around that would be to buy the adult size but downsize using a lighter weight yarn and smaller needles. And then obviously you'd have a different gauge, and you know, you'd have to modify in other ways, but that would still allow you to get that look but with smaller ease. And I have mentioned that I've got a video coming up which I'm going to record today and I'll be putting out next on the weekend, just what size you want to pick to make if your gauge doesn't match the pattern gauge, and you know the desired size you want it to knit, but you can't pick that size because your gauge is different, or that size doesn't exist, and so you've gone down to a smaller gauge to try to downsize the pattern. So yeah, just that can also allow you to use an adult size pattern for someone who's younger by just using or someone who's smaller, just by using a different yarn. It does mean more knitting, obviously, like often with a junior pattern, if you're using the same yarn for someone smaller, you get to do less knitting. But then if you lose some of those beautiful features, you know, it's not the same pattern really. So anyway, I just wanted to mention that and say thank you to the viewer who mentioned that. I didn't see in your name, I couldn't tell what your name was from there. Sometimes when people comment, it sort of has their name in the comment, but sometimes it doesn't. So I'm sorry that I can't mention you by name. I would like to, but I couldn't interpret it from your username. But what that did do is it made me go and have another look at the Moby pattern, because I actually have both of those. I have the Moby Adult and the Moby Junior because they were gifted to me. So I just, by Mary and Diane. So that was really nice to actually be able to have a sweater where I've got both versions. And those two don't have that. They actually are very much the same pattern. One just has, the Junior has much less of this sort of, I guess it's moss stitch sort of sections on the side, but the features themselves are still all there. Right, but you might just want to sort of check that in advance if you don't know, or if you're just alternating or deciding between the two patterns, but there's a particular feature in the adult one just that you like, make sure it's still there in the junior version. Right, so I'm up to my acquisitions and plans. So my first acquisition is actually related to a plan. I've just got to find it. Maybe I'll mention the plan first. Jennifer Steingass has put out another pattern, or done another test, a call for test knitting, and it's probably not the best time for me because I'm still at school, but I love her patterns, and I just, I do enjoy the whole testing experience and knitting with other people all at the same time. So I put my hand up for it. I put my hand up for one a couple of sweaters back and didn't get chosen for that one. So I thought, oh, I'll try now because I think I actually have yarn for this, and I did get picked. So it's due on December the 9th. And December the 10th is my last day of work. So I do actually have to complete this before I finish work. But I think I'm going to be fine because, so the pattern's called Snowbound. And I actually do have the yarn because I actually asked if it would be okay if I knit a short sleeve version. So, and Jen said okay. So that works for me because this is the Petite Lamb's Wool Bichet Bush in this color medium gray. Now I had planned to make the twist loop top out of this, but I actually kind of felt like I may not want that next to skin anyway. So like I was thinking maybe the Knitting for Olive Cotton Merino might be a bit nicer. I love that yarn, and so yeah, that might work better for that top for me. So I thought for this one, because this is actually the yarn that Jen designed the Snowbound sweater out of, the Le Petite Lamb's Wool, and I saw someone had on D-Stash this turquoise color, so I thought that actually would look really nice together. I was a little unsure about whether there was enough contrast, so I took a photo of the two of them and then put it in mono, and I'll just put a picture up there, and I think there is enough contrast. The other thing that you can do if you're planning ahead, you can go to Ravelry and you can look up this particular yarn and you can filter for both. Like at first I thought you could only filter for one colorway, so you click on colorways. I might even do like a little insert here where I actually show you, and I'll do a voiceover actually. So I've just gone into Ravelry and clicked on yarns, and then I started searching for the yarn, and I just needed to type in the first word of the brand name and clicked search, and Le Petite Lamb's Wool pops up first. So I click on projects, and there are 6,050 projects. I want the colorway turquoise, so I click on colorways up on the top left, and they're listed in alphabetical order. I know turquoise is on the second page because I have done this before. So then I scroll down and I click on projects for turquoise. So there's 238 projects using turquoise that are on Ravelry. And on the top left, you see it says turquoise and then a pencil next to it. So if I click on pencil and then I switch or to and then I go to the next drop down and look up medium grey, which is my other colour, then that's going to show me the projects that have both turquoise and medium grey. And I can see there are 9 matches there, and the top left one, like the first project, actually has medium grey as the main colour and turquoise as the contrast colour. So I can click on that and take a look at that project and get a better idea before I've even started knitting of what those two would look like. So I think that's a really good feature on Ravelry. Yeah, so I had a look at these two together and it did look like there was enough contrast. I'm not too sure that I love the combination, but I think I like it enough, and I do love this colour. So yep, so that is an upcoming plan. That's an acquisition. I got 2 skeins of that on D-Stash, and I've got 3 skeins of this, so I'll be making a short sleeved version of that. And just in terms of plans, even though it won't be straight away, the lady that I bought it off D-Stash was selling 2 of them. I probably only need 1, but I wanted to make it worth her while to send in the post anyway for me. And so then also, like, because she was offering free shipping, so I thought, well, if she's only sold 1 skein and she's covering the shipping, that feels a bit mean to like only buy 1 skein. So I've got at least 2, because I have this left over from one of my Ingalls sweater by Caitlin Hunter, and I thought, what a great match. So for that, I could use whatever I have left over. I could use for an Oslo hat with mohair, or I could use it for some kind of colour work, because obviously those two go really nicely together. So that's, and I guess it's an acquisition because I've been sent the pattern for a testing, and that's an acquisition because I bought those off D-Stash. So that's just from the Ravelry Forum Australian Knitters. That's where I usually check for D-Stash for within Australia. The other thing that is a plan is I talked about being gifted this Jaggerspun from Mindy. I showed you that, I think, last week. And I just went into my stash and found, because I was trying to think of a mohair to use with it for the Monday sweater. And I found this one here. That's Rowan Kid Silk Haze in the colourway Blackberry, and I've actually used that for an Ingalls and something else just for the colourwork section. And I think that's going to look really nice, actually. It's a little dark, but I think it was going to be okay. But the nice thing about having this little leftovers is I can actually, obviously that's not enough to knit anything with, but I could swatch it up and at least see, without having to purchase balls of it, if I like these 2 colours together, or, you know, I'll be able to tell straight away, no, it's too dark, or, you know, it just doesn't go as well as I'd hoped for it to. So that is a plan. I think the Monday sweater by Petite Knit. I don't have that pattern, but I was debating between that and No Frills, but I think I just feel like I want to, just to make it more interesting. It's mostly a stockinette sweater. At least if I'm knitting in a different pattern, there's a bit of novelty there. And from what I've seen, other people seem to really like those twins who knit, and Katie from the Fruitful Hands, they both are really happy with their Monday sweaters. So I hope I've got that right. That's just from memory, but I'm pretty sure they really love their Monday sweaters. So I'm going to swatch that up, and if I like it, because that's one of the things I find quite difficult. Trying to buy mohair to match yarn that's already in my stash is quite challenging. So I have noticed that Knitting for Olive, they often do, like on Instagram, they'll take some mohair and pair it with a whole bunch of their merino and show you all the different looks, which I find really, really helpful, because it just means you get the visual without having to, buy all the different ones and swatch them up. So yep, so that is a plan, and when I have swatched that, I'll show you at least the swatch, see if that's a good combination. Right, so I'm up to what has caught my eye. A couple of things have caught my eye that maybe I've mentioned before, but maybe I haven't. Maybe they've caught my eye, but I haven't actually mentioned. They're 2 things that actually, the Soul Blouse by Agio Knit, that's fairly recent. Like the designer was on, sorry, but that bird is so noisy. Probably talking to their partner. I'm almost positive they've got babies in the nesting box. Anyway, sorry, back to the Soul Blouse by Agio Knit. I saw them on the designer on Fruity Knitting, and that particular sweater definitely caught my eye. It's a 20 stitch gauge of sport weight yarn plus lace, but it's knit, it's colourwork knit flat as well as in the round, which means you're doing a lot of purling with colourwork, which I don't really love. It's been years since I've done that. I mean, the only other alternative would be steeking, but that's not how the pattern's written. It's written to knit it flat. So that caught my eye, but then that also made me think about the Porcelain sweater by Linaholm Samso, and that also has, it's gorgeous, but it also has colour work that's knit flat. So, but I really love the look of it. So maybe it's just the colours that are drawing me, but yeah, I just think it's really pretty. That one is a 21 stitch gauge, which is kind of interesting actually. I'll mention that in a minute, but I just want you to hold this thought. A 21 stitch gauge with DK and lace. So that's Peer Gynt and TYNN silk mohair on 4mm needles. 21 stitch gauge, and I did read in stockinette. It was in another language, Danish maybe, but I did a translate and it said stockinette. So 21 stitch gauge for Peer Gynt and TYNN silk mohair on a 4mm needle. The other thing that has caught my eye is the zipper. This is the last one for what has caught my eye, is the zipper sweater by Petite Knit. The reason that has caught my eye is I was planning to buy the straps for the Florence bag by Petite Knit, and I thought, well, if I'm going to buy some hardware from her site, I may as well, if I'm doing the shipping, is there anything else that I would want? And I thought, well, if I'm going to make the zipper sweater, I would like to buy the zipper, at least for the first one, from there to sort of see the, to see it use that official one, and then maybe if I make it again, I'd look for a local alternative. Anyway, so I was looking at the various versions of zipper sweater man, adult, junior, then there's zipper sweater light. So the zipper sweater is knit with Peer Gynt and TYNN silk mohair on 15 stitch gauge. So the same yarn as the porcelain sweater, but a 6 stitches difference. And obviously a larger needle, a 5mm needle, but that's a big difference. A 5mm needle, 15 stitches, same yarn, 4mm needle, 21 stitches. So yeah, I don't know, like I'm not sure that if I got gauge on one, I wouldn't on the other. That just doesn't sort of seem to match. Maybe I'm not sure which one I'd struggle. 21 stitch with Peer Gynt and TYNN silk mohair sounds like mine would be bigger than that, but something to think about. Anyway, so I'd either be making the 15 stitch gauge one, but that probably wouldn't get a lot of wear here in Sydney. The 20 stitch gauge one, the lighter version, is just the Peer Gynt, and that's 20 stitch gauge. I didn't even check the needle size, but that's just Peer Gynt itself, and that's pretty interchangeable with a lot of yarns I could use to get a 20 stitch gauge. Yes, so anyway, I just thought I'd mention that because that has caught my eye. I imagine the zipper that you would purchase would be the same regardless of which, whether you're using the light or the, I don't know, that's a good question. I'll have to have a look. Maybe the zipper sweater uses a sturdier zipper than the zipper sweater light. I'm not sure. I'll have to have a look. I'll report back. Anyway, so those are the things that have caught my eye. Yes, I'm nearing the end. I'm really trying to be as concise as possible so that I'm not waffling. Hopefully whatever I'm mentioning is at least relevant. You can always skip ahead if it's bits you're not interested in. So I'm almost at the end. I just thought I'd mention a little bit about yarn purchasing. So it's a bit of a thing in Australia. We just don't have access to yarns as much, and the shipping can be really expensive. A lot of the yarns that we might want to purchase, even though we do have beautiful yarns in Australia, we hear a lot about yarns in Europe, Sanders Garn and Knitting for Olive and all that, Gepard Garn and heaps of others. So the shipping can be a bit of a thing. So when we buy, we tend to buy a lot, I guess, to sort of save on shipping. So I think that's probably why I do end up with a bit of a stash, because I'm like, well, I may as well add more, seeing there's shipping involved anyway. But I've got my in-laws visiting me from the US in a couple of weeks, and I usually take that opportunity to place an order. So I saw that Pearl Soho at first they just had 25% off their linen quill and a few other yarns, but now I think they've got 25% off everything. I'm not sure when you watch this if that sale is still on, but I put stuff in my cart to send to my father-in-law, and it was going to be free shipping. And then when I looked at the final balance, it went way up, like over $20 up US. And I was like, wow, why did that go up? And then I realized it was pricing it with me in Australia with no sales tax. And then when I made the shipping to California, it added in all of the sales tax. So the sales tax was, substantial because I was making a decent size order. And then I thought, let me just see what the shipping to Australia was. And the shipping was less than the sales tax. The shipping to Australia was less than the sales tax. So I did this, I put all this stuff in the cart for my father-in-law to pack and cram into his suitcase to bring to me. And then it ended up being cheaper if I just ship it to myself. So, and then I felt silly just deleting the cart because I sort of was doing this in line. And I was like, actually, now I'm kind of sold on this yarn and I really want it. So anyway, all that to say, I did buy it. But you might find that worth noting if you are buying yarn from the US and you're in Australia, they may not have the sales tax added, and like the shipping might end up being more than the sales tax is what I'm saying. So yeah, anyway, that's just a thought. I thought I'd share that. The other thing that I mentioned is I was thinking about buying some yarn to have sent to him, like from, say, Woolen Company, like some Sanders Garn or some Knitting for Olive. And then I realized, actually, like, that is a lot of shipping miles. That yarn has gone, it's not even from the US, it's from Europe. So it's gone from Europe to the US and then would be coming to me. Maybe I should just order that directly when I want it, rather than, and then also just loading up my father-in-law to like stuff into his luggage. Not that yarn takes up that much room, but still. So, and then of course I just went to have a look and see where there was yarn, like where can I buy Sanders Garn from in Europe. And then I came across a website that I've bought from before, but not for ages. And it must just not pop up in my, my searches, SKD Yarns. And they sell Sanders Garn yarn and County. Now, I definitely have bought from them before, but not for a long time. But they sell a huge range of Sanders Garn yarn and at really good prices. So if you're looking for Sanders Garn, and quite a big range. So like a lot of colors as well. So if you're in Australia and you're looking for Sanders Garn, it would be worth taking a look at SKD Yarns. I'll put a link to them in the description. I don't know what their shipping's like because I haven't actually bought from them in so long. But if you're buying a substantial amount and it's a lot cheaper than buying from somewhere else, the shipping then that may still be cheaper than less shipping from somewhere else, is what I'm saying. So something to think about. And yeah, because I would like to get some Sanders Garn Lena for some tops, because I really liked my Thea top out of it. So, right, yes, I did promise I was almost finishing up. I'm almost up to personal stuff. Just one last thing that's knitting related, and that is it was sort of personal, but last Saturday I went to my once a month local Knitters Guild of New South Wales meeting. Southern, we meet in Cogra, and yeah, I hadn't been, I think, in like 6 years, so it was really lovely to go to see so many familiar faces and new faces. Yeah, so if you have some kind of if you have a guild meeting near you, it really is worth going. Like, I really enjoyed it, and I'm going to be a regular once a month attendee now, because life has sort of settled down a little bit for me now that I can do that, and I only teach one Saturday a month at Skein Sisters. So if I do one Saturday a month at Skein Sisters and one Saturday a month at my Knitters Guild, yeah, I think that's pretty good. So yeah, it was really lovely. One thing that they did mention is, so I went to the guild retreat this year, and they only do that every 2 years, and in the alternate years they do a cruise. So I thought about going on a cruise, and I was talking with Beck, my friend Beck, who's in Brisbane, about going. But then a couple of things, actually. The cruise is in August next year, and it's on Carnival Splendor. And when I had a look at some of the recent reviews, they weren't great. And yeah, and it's a cruise to nowhere, so you don't even get off, right? Which is fine. Like, sometimes cruising can be a lot of fun. You just get to sort of hang out with people and, chat. And so it's sort of, the social aspect, which would be awesome. But if the food's not great and I don't know, and it's not cheap. So, and then I realized as well that Beck and I were planning on going to Bendigo next year. So maybe doing like Bendigo one year, the guild gathering the other year. So I've ended up deciding I'm not going to go. But if you think you're interested, I just thought I'd mention there is a cruise if you're in New South Wales or near New South Wales. But I would, take a look at the reviews online. I will be really interested to hear how people find it. But for me, anyway, once I've realised I'm going to Bendigo anyway, and I wouldn't want to do both because it's like maybe the 1st to the 4th in August, and the Sheep and Wool show is like in July, right? So the timing wouldn't work, and it certainly wouldn't work, I reckon, for Beck to do both, because like neither of them are in, like she's in Brisbane, so you've got to get to Bendigo for one, which is a long way from Brisbane, and the other one she'd have to at least get down to Sydney. Anyway, so that's it for the knitting content, and the personal stuff is going to be super small. So if you're leaving me now, thank you so much for watching. I will have a tutorial on the weekend on gauge, and then I'll be back with another episode next Wednesday. Right, so personal stuff, I will just mention I got a hard copy of Atomic Habits from my library. I haven't actually opened it up yet, but because I listened to the audiobook while I was walking, I wasn't able to make any notes on it, or actually, aside from just mentally trying to file things away. Oh yes, I'll do that different. Like I'm trying to put my clothes away every night before I go to bed, so that then I don't end up with this massive pile on my dresser of that was Monday's clothes, that was Tuesday's clothes, that was Wednesday's clothes, and then have to put them all away in the weekend, but just live under things falling off my dresser all week. So, but now that I've got the hard copy, I can actually like go through and make a few, obviously it's from the library, so I can't write on it, but I can make a few notes and start to sort of schedule in a few of the changes that I read about, or listened to on the audiobook. So, so I have finished the audiobook, but yes, I'm keen to actually apply it a bit more, if otherwise it's just head knowledge. The other thing is I just want to say thank you so much to everyone for how warmly you, if you watch the Bali episode with my daughter Alex, all the lovely comments. I don't expect everyone to watch those, right? Like if you're here for the knitting content, you're probably not even here now, and that's totally cool, right? So even if you watch 5 minutes of one of my episodes and then you've got to run off because you've got other stuff to do, like we all just, there are podcasts that I watch where I don't get to watch every single one. If I did, I wouldn't sort of walk out my door if I got to watch if I watched every single podcast of every single podcaster that I liked. I wouldn't do anything except, watch knitting podcasts and knit. So, and yeah, there's other stuff to do in life. So if you did watch it, I just want to say thank you. And yeah, I think she really enjoyed doing it. So other things that are happening for me this week, I'm teaching knitting at Skein Sisters this Saturday. I'm doing a short rows class and a finishing techniques class, and then that's the last of my classes until February next year, because they don't do any in December and January. So that's quite nice. I'll have a bit of a break from school, from teaching knitting, and then I've got like one more guild retreat, I think, or not retreat, guild gathering on the first Saturday in December. And then other than that, it'll just be like going to the beach, spending time with family, looking after my husband after his knee surgery, because that's 2 weeks from today. But at the moment, this week is particularly busy because I've got exams to mark, an exam to write, and reports, my last set of reports due on Monday. So I think next Wednesday I'll be much more chilled. I might hopefully have some progress on I'm allowed to show, so this isn't a secret squirrel test knit, I'm allowed to show snowbound in progress, just no finished object photos. So if I do happen to finish it, I won't be able to show it until after it's officially released sort of mid-December. Right, so I think that's it for the podcast. Thank you so much for watching, and I will be back next week. Bye.